Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to Crowd Church with myself and the newly returned Anna. How are we doing?
I'm well, thank you. Yeah. When you
Good.
say newly returned, do you mean
As in,
newly
newly
returned
back to
from holiday?
England. Yeah. As in,
What can I say? It's not been that long since I last did. About 2 weeks,
yeah.
but
Last time Anna was here was 1996. No, no, not at all. As in, yes, you were away on holiday, looking tanned, looking at peace.
yeah, we went to Spain for a week during half term, which was lovely. And then this week we've had a short week back, started back to school and work on Wednesday. So it's been a nice short week.
Easy intro, easy intro. And we were talking before we went live. You managed to escape all of the chaos, which is current at a lot of UK airports.
I did. We were lucky. I think Liverpool airport where we flew out of wasn't too affected. So yeah, very lucky with that.
It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So, if you have just tuned in, we are not a holiday talk show. No, not at all. We are an online church. We're a digital church. We are here for those that might not see the point of church, as well as the folks who maybe like Anna and myself have been around church for a wee while, as they say. I'm not going to ask who's been in church longer, you or me, Anna, because I think that would be unfair, especially on me, if I'm honest with you. But welcome to church. Great that you're here. Do say hi in the comments if this is your first time with us. It'd be great for you to come say hi. And if this is not your first time with us, say hi as well. I can see Matt's in the comments, busy as always. So come say hi to Matt. Come say hello to whoever else is in there. I think John Farrington is moderating the Crowd Church comments, so he'll be in the stream as well. Any questions, thoughts, comments, do leave them below. And I think if I press this button here, magic happens. Oh, yes.
Oh
Look
yeah.
at that. Yes. That's the
So
website, by the way.
professional.
No, I don't think anyone could ever accuse us of that. So if you would like to know more about Crowd Church, you can head on over to our website, www.crowd.church, or go to Instagram or Facebook at Crowd Church. We are there as well as on YouTube. And you know what? You can get all of the back catalogue, as they like to say on podcasts, I've discovered. You can see all of our back catalogue on YouTube and on our website as well. So let's got that out of the way. Anna, what's coming up today?
So today we're looking at what does the Bible say about suffering, and we've got the lovely John Harding speaking. So yeah, that's coming up soon, and yeah, we'll also have some conversation street where we'll discuss what we think about what he has to say afterwards, and yeah, lots of banter, I'm sure, no doubt, from people like Matt Crew.
No doubt.
We love him, Matt.
Yeah. And the banter too. It's
Yeah,
although we have to obviously. I mean, it's not a. It's a bit of a heavy topic for today, isn't it? What does the Bible say about
it is.
suffering? So I don't know. I don't know whether how the banter will flow on this one, but
No.
we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see how it
Well,
goes on.
he's already abusing you though. He says
Is
radiance
he?
on the right, bearded ruffian on the left. So already started.
What is it? Radiance on the right, bearded ruffian on the left. I hope, because I'm not being funny, but on the screen that I have, because of the way it
Yeah,
is on the live stream, I'm on the right and you're on the left. But
I know.
I hope you're seeing it differently because
We see everything opposite to how you see it. So just be careful what you say, people. You're watching from home. Just know that we're different to everything you see.
which is why whenever we say to people, you know, when we used to put the phone number on or the website address, point to it, and people were always struggling because it's back to front. So yes, so I'm hoping that Matt sees it differently because definitely, you know, I'll take the bearded ruffian. I've definitely been called worse, that's for sure. So you are, yeah. Well, Radiance, I'm assuming is you, Anna, from the holiday Radiance.
Yeah, hopefully.
Well, let's hope so. Yeah. So, as you have said correctly, we have got the good old John Harding talking about suffering. I'm laughing because I've just noticed the comment Matt Cruz put in. I'm suffering for a decade of Man United losses. I'm not quite sure, Matt. That's a suffering that John Harding is going to talk about.
Yeah,
Just
and
putting that out
also I'm not sure we have much that we can help you with on that. Like, I'm not about that.
Oh, it's brilliant. I love it. Well, let's get, yeah, well, we can do the banter now, so let's get it out of the way. I'm not sure how much we can help you. Love it. So, if you are here with us for the first time here at Crowd Church, the way it kind of works is this. We're going to do a talk, which John Harding has recorded. John Harding's one of the team here at Crowd. He's the senior pastor of Frontline Church, which Crowd Church is affiliated to. He's going to do a talk. It's going to last 20 minutes because it's a John Harding talk. He's usually bang on time. So yeah, after that talk, Anna will be back to introduce the worship. And then, as Anna said, we're going to have Conversation Street. So if you have any questions, anything you want us to talk about in Conversation Street, any stories you want to share, any thoughts, any ideas of your own, any experiences, whack them all in the comments, because we would love to hear from you, and we will try and get around to all of those if we can. We never answer everybody's questions, but we do get to quite a few of them, and we'd love it if you just threw your questions, comments, thoughts, ideas in there as well. So, Andrew, have I missed anything?
I don't think so.
That'd be a first, if I'm honest with you. It would be a first. So, without further ado, let's hear from the Right Reverend John Harding. Here we go.
What does the Bible say about suffering? Wow, well, that is a big topic, isn't it? It's an emotive, sensitive question. Because I suppose what we're really asking here is, what does the Bible say about my suffering? What does the Bible say about the suffering that someone I love is going through, even now? Maybe you are even thinking, well, where is God in my suffering? Or even, is there a God? Why would God allow this suffering in my life or in my world if there was a God? And so for some people, the presence of suffering in the world, in their own lives, causes them to question the existence of God. They say things like, well, how can an all-loving, all-powerful God allow suffering in the world? They don't see the presence of suffering in the world as compatible with the presence of God, or at least with the presence of the God as described in the Bible. They say, well, if God is truly loving and there's suffering, then he can't be powerful, because if he was powerful, he would stop that suffering. Or if God is truly powerful and there's suffering in the world, then he can't be truly loving, or he would stop it. So therefore, there can't be such a God in a world as ours, because there is suffering in the world. And that's an argument that has been around, well, since the beginning of time, really. Logically, intellectually, philosophically, I don't think it's a very good argument. But this problem, this mystery of reconciling and matching up the God of the Bible with the presence and existence of suffering, well, it is rarely played out at the level of logic or reason. It's an argument that really gets played out at the emotional level, the personal, the experiential level. That's why it's such a challenging topic. But I do think the Bible offers a compelling response to the mystery of suffering. Now, traditionally, Christians have said, well, yes, you can totally have an all good, all loving God, the sort of God described throughout the Bible, a God who is all powerful, a God who is not absent from the world, a God that is not unaware of human suffering. Such a God is totally compatible with the human experience, with human suffering. Now, as Christians, we tend to respond to this problem in two ways. Firstly, Christians tend to say that God allows suffering in the world because suffering is a necessary outcome of free will. God created humans in his image, distinct from the rest of creation, distinct from the animal kingdom, because humans are given freedom, autonomy, the ability to make their own decisions, the ability to direct their own lives and make their own choices. It's what separates us from the animal kingdom. We have become moral beings, beings capable of great good, but by the same virtue, beings capable of great evil. So put simply, God is not responsible, therefore, for our suffering. Humans are. Humans misuse the gift of free will. We make choices that harm ourselves and that harm others. And this takes us right back to Adam and Eve, the story we read in the Bible in Genesis 1-3, in the garden paradise, a place of perfection. No sickness, no disease, no pain, no death. But through that first sin, their choice to take and eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil rather than to take from the tree of life, that's where they went wrong. In disobeying God, they, Adam and Eve, brought catastrophe, global consequences into this world. Bringing the first sin into a perfect creation impacted every single aspect of creation. Pain, sickness, aging, ultimately death entered into the world. Environmental damage now entered into the world. A world now capable of floods and earthquakes. And so there's a very real sense that it is us, it is humans, who brought suffering into an all-loving, all-powerful God's perfect creation. And we now live in that corrupt, broken world as a corrupt, broken people. And so we suffer. But then, of course, people will say to that argument of free will, well, why did God create humans like that? Why did God give humans free will? It's like giving a machine gun to a kid. Just look at the potential damage that is done through that action. But of course, for us as Christians, that risk that God took in giving that gift of free will, that was utterly essential and worth it. Because God only created the world for humans. God only created humans for relationship with himself. The whole reason why there is something rather than nothing is so that that something could freely, willingly choose to be in relationship with its creator. We are given free will so that we have the capacity to love and to experience love. With free will, we have the capacity to harm others, of course. But without free will, we'd simply be animals or robots, incapable of truly loving God, our creator. So free will is a powerful response to the mystery of suffering. The second response that Christians tend to make to this problem of suffering in a world of an all-loving, all-powerful God is that God ultimately uses suffering and God works through suffering to bring about something good, something positive. It's the idea that there is a purpose to the suffering we experience, that suffering drives human development. And to some extent, I imagine that all of us will have experienced this dynamic, a bit like the grit in the oyster that becomes a pearl, or the pressure on the coal that becomes a diamond, or the tearing of the muscle through the weight training and the lifting of weights. The muscle tears, but it causes it to grow stronger as a result. All of us will have had experiences that have made us stronger, kinder, wiser people. And the Bible says, Romans chapter 5, verse 3, that we can boast in our suffering. We can boast in our suffering and glory in our suffering when we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And it goes on to say that hope frees us from shame. Now, I used to be a school teacher, and towards the end of my teaching career, I taught mainly 17 and 18-year-old boys, bright boys. I taught the philosophy of religion, and we would unpack this mystery of suffering together. And when I used to use this verse from Romans, I would start by asking the boys in the class, who likes cake? Who likes cake? And they'd all put their hands up, and then I'd got 4 volunteers, 4 lads out to the front, ready for their cake, and I would give one of the boys flour, the other whisked eggs, the other butter, and the other sugar. And then I'd say, well, tuck in, lads, start eating. You see, we all like cake, but that does not mean that we will enjoy the ingredients that make up cake. And that's a little bit like this verse from Romans. We all want hope and freedom from shame, but we don't necessarily enjoy the character formation part. And we really don't like the perseverance part, having to keep moving forwards and life is tough. We just want breakthrough now. And we certainly don't like the suffering part. But these things are the essential ingredients that lead us towards a transformed life. The ingredients that make us stronger, kinder, wiser people. Suffering has the power to be transformative. But then, of course, people will say, well, John, if God is all loving and all powerful, and if suffering is for a purpose, it's meant to grow us and transform us, then people will say, well, then why does God allow excessive suffering or pointless suffering? Or why do some people not grow and develop through their suffering? Or couldn't God have created a world where we grow and develop through pleasure and not pain? These are some of the objections that people raise. Just going through those questions and objections really takes me back to being in the classroom as a philosophy teacher all those years ago. And I remember clearly the first time that I went to Congo, to the DRC, to the Kivus. And I was a school teacher at the time. I was helping to build links between my local church frontline, my school, and the work that a church was doing on the Congo-Ugandan border in order to rehabilitate boy soldiers. I mean, just a desperate situation, horrific, one fueled by Western consumerism, fueled by our desire for diamonds and coltan mining for mobile phones, boys of maybe even just 12 taken from their families, dehumanized through drugs and rape, used as cannon fodder in a conflict that has been going on and ignored for decades in this region of the Kivus where we work, where we serve. Just horrific suffering. And yet, what I found there, alongside the suffering, alongside the poverty, alongside the conflicts, what I found there was hope. Just many, many beautiful Christians who, by our standards, had so little, and yet they were working tirelessly to rescue those boy soldiers, to rehabilitate them, to educate them. They were working with women who'd been raped as a weapon of war. They were giving them a refuge, a safe place to live. They were giving them training and counselling. And what I found in that place for the first time was a completely different perspective on my perspective on suffering. I found there that no one was asking the question of where is God in our suffering. That made no sense to them. Rather, they were praying and thanking God for his presence with them in that place of suffering. Their focus was on not the suffering, but on how God was helping them to endure their suffering. They discovered the deep and profound truth that when you are at that point in life where Jesus is all that you have got in life, well, that's the point when you realize that Jesus is all you need in life. And I came back from that trip, that first time I went there, back into the classroom, back into this selective boys' school, teaching this philosophy module on God and the problem of evil and suffering. And I remember saying to the boys in my class, boys, this idea of where is God in our suffering, to me, it just feels like an indulgence of the modern Western world. These people that I'd met in Congo and were building relationship, they weren't philosophically pondering on the question of how could an all-loving, all-powerful God allow suffering in the world. They were experiencing God and encountering God and drawing on God and on his presence to sustain them in the hardship of each day. They were forming communities of faith that we call churches. They were forming communities that served one another and met one another's needs and shared the resources that they had. They knew that suffering was producing perseverance. Perseverance producing character. Boy, did they have character. And character was producing hope. And they held onto hope. You know, just last night, I spent the night in accident and emergency, the emergency room, having taken my 87-year-old mother into that place due to extreme pain. I mean, she was struggling. I've never seen her in so much pain. And I said to her, Mum, I just feel so helpless here as we're waiting. Is there anything I can do for you? Anything I can get for you? She just said, pray for me. Pray for me. And so I prayed for her there in the hospital cubicle. And honestly, I'm not sure that prayer made a great deal of difference to her pain. The pain remained and started to wear off as powerful drugs kicked in. But she said to me, she said, John, how do people go through this sort of thing without the Lord in their lives? How do they go through this sort of thing without the presence of God with them? This world in which we live, it throws up so many big questions, so many mysteries, stuff that I can't get my head around, stuff that I've tried to study and understand academically, and stuff, if I'm entirely honest with you, I still don't really understand. I still don't have any answers to. But it seems to me that suffering is pretty certain in this life. We can't seem to escape suffering, pain and hardship. But we do get to decide how we respond to it. We do get to decide if we go through our suffering with God or without God. We do get to choose if we're going to walk through that pain and invite God's presence to be with us in that place, or if we walk through it angry at God, maybe even rejecting God and denying God. There's this little verse in the Bible, in the Gospels, the words of Jesus recorded and spoken by Jesus in Greek, recorded in Greek. And this verse that causes all sorts of trouble for Bible translators over the centuries, it's Matthew 10:29, and Jesus says, not one sparrow falls to the ground without the Father, without God knowing. Not one sparrow falls to the ground without God the Father knowing. And the reason that Bible translators have struggled to translate this verse into English over the centuries is because if you look at the original literal Greek words of Jesus, Jesus literally says, not one sparrow falls to the ground without the Father. That's it. Not one sparrow falls to the ground without the Father. And so the Bible translators tend to add the knowing bit, without the Father knowing, to try and make sense of what Jesus is saying here about God. But you know, I think this makes perfect sense, just as it is. Not one sparrow falls to the ground without the Father, because I really believe that Jesus is responding to this question of where is God in our suffering? And I'll tell you where God is in our suffering. Father God is so present with his suffering creation that he draws close to each and every sparrow in their final moments. Where is God? He is most close to us in our suffering. And Jesus goes on to say, how much more valuable are you to God than a humble sparrow? God wants to draw close to you in your suffering. He wants to sustain you in your suffering with his presence. One of the most ancient and frequent songs of worship of the Bible is the simple refrain, the Lord is gracious and compassionate. God is gracious and compassionate. God is compassionate. He is compassionate. It's a beautiful word. It's from two Latin words, passion, meaning to suffer, and com, the prefix meaning alongside, like companion. God is compassionate. He is the co-sufferer, the one who suffers alongside his suffering creation. And so we do have a choice. Invite him into your hardship, invite him into your pain, invite him into your suffering. Ask him to draw close to you, draw close to him. We call that worship. Draw close through his word, the Bible. Draw close through community. Invest in other believers and you will experience him carrying you through. Maybe he will give you breakthrough in that suffering. Maybe you will have to endure that suffering for the rest of your life. But we know this for sure, that one day we will see him in heaven. We will be transformed into his likeness. Paradise, Eden restored. A place that is described as one with no more tears or sorrow or pain or grief or death. In that moment, we know that suffering will be over forever. Amen.
Amen. Welcome back, everyone. Thought that was absolutely fantastic, that talk from John just then. Just so much rich quality content that we can unpack in a minute. But first of all, we're just going to have a bit of time of worship and reflection. And we're going to play a song now called When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. So just take a moment, listen to the words, sing along if you want to, and then do post your questions and start thinking about what we've just heard.
When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me more I sacrifice them to his blood. See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did as such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose, so rich a crown. I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, my Lord. I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, my Lord. Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small, of so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, my Lord. I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, my Lord. I love you for the cross, I love you for the cross, I love you for the cross, my Lord. I love you for the cross, I love you for the cross, I love you for the cross, my Lord.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Conversation Street with myself and with Anna. We are going to get into all your questions and comments. Feel free to write them as we go through if you haven't done so already, or if we say something that you just needs a bit more clarity, go ahead. It's quite a... Well, Anna, John said it right at the start. He said at this talk, this is an emotive topic. This is very emotionally led. I am aware of this, and usually I'm trying to be sensitive. I'm not normally that good at that. And so I appreciate that actually for some people watching this, this is very emotive, and this is very difficult and very, very hard. I guess why do you think that is?
Well, I think John said it really clearly at the start, didn't they? like it is personal. Like if you've got an area of suffering in your life, or someone that you love or are close to has, then it's really personal and emotional, and it's all tied up with how you feel about God. It's all these questions like, how can God be good, and how can he love me when he's letting me go through this, or when he's letting someone I love go through this, whether that's, someone being ill, like John talked about his mum, didn't he? Or you're talking about on a much bigger scale, like, global poverty in different parts of the world, or but yeah, often it's really personal. So for me, it would be questions like, how can God love me when, we've not been able to have the family we wanted, and we've lost babies, and how can a loving God let that happen to us? So yeah, it is really personal, and it is really sensitive, and I think that's why it's difficult to talk about these things. But I'm really glad that at Crowd Church we're doing that, because I think it's so important. I think it's really easy for Christians to kind of shy away from the difficult questions and the difficult subjects.
Yeah.
I love the fact that we don't do that here. I'm getting blinded by sun now. I love the fact we don't do that though. I love the fact that we delve into the difficult questions, the questions we're not sure how to answer, and we make space for people to ask those questions and to explore their faith in a real way. Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? And you said on your Instagram post earlier on actually that we aren't sure what to do with people's pain, and it's I think it's really interesting because you think about this question. Well, where is God in the suffering, or why does God allow suffering? You are. There's two people involved in that conversation. The first person is asking the question, and like John said, that's often from a place of pain. They've experienced it, or a loved one's experienced it, or it's just a simple way to dismiss a conversation, maybe. But then on the other hand, you've got the person being asked the question, and because it is tricky, because it is emotive, and because we are not sure what to do with people's pain, it becomes one of those questions I think for the longest time we've as Christians have avoided, because spoiler alert, there's no straightforward answer. Right? There just isn't, and it's okay not to know all the answers. I think it's probably worth saying that right at the start. There is pain, and there is people's pain, and how to handle that. It's not always straightforward. Did you? I mean, obviously I say obviously, for those of you who don't know, you can go back and listen to Anna's story. You've talked a lot about the miscarriage stuff that you and Andy went through. Did you find it? When you were going through that, was it the people that were talking to you, did they find it hard to know what to do with you, how to respond with you, how to talk with you during those times of pain?
Sometimes I think so. I mean, I think the best thing people did, and close friends did a lot, was just listen. And I think people want your presence in their pain as much as they want answers. People want you to sit with them in the pain. And I suppose that touches on what John was saying as well about God as our co-sufferer. He's compassionate, and he's literally sits with us in our pain. And I think that's what people are really wanting. They're not necessarily wanting you to fix it all or to have all the theological answers, because, even clever people like John can do so much in a talk, and what he just said was brilliant, but it only goes so far in explaining away people's pain. I don't think you can just explain people's experiences away. And often I don't think that's necessarily what people want. Like for me, I feel like the question of why did this happen to us is a much less important question than, so what now? What do I do with this? What next? Where do I go from here? And I think people that can sit with you and listen and help you to find hope for the future, and help you to find healing, and help you to move forward and find that, so what now? I think that's so important. And I think that's kind of what Jesus modeled, isn't it? He did sit with people in their pain. He didn't look away. He didn't avoid it. So yeah.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because one of the most unique things about the Christian faith is that at the heart of its message, at the heart of the Christian message, is a belief that the Creator God actually partook of the suffering on our behalf, that actually God himself suffered, and we would argue unfairly and unjustly and undeservedly, but he chose to do that on our behalf. And he got involved very, very personally. And it's quite a unique message. You don't hear that usually in other people's faiths, that actually God got involved in the suffering. And that's part of his redemptive plan, isn't it, really? And but that requires, I think, you touched on it. It requires an eternal perspective, doesn't it, sometimes when we think about these things?
Yeah, it does. We're still, we're still sort of living in the middle, aren't we, of the story? Like, as John said, there was the beginning, the world was perfect, and then sin entered into the world. And even though we kind of live in the knowledge that Jesus has died and the cross has happened, we don't live in the completion of the story yet. We're still sort of in those middle days where we're waiting for all of creation to still be redeemed and brought back into perfection, and redeemed into what God always planned for it. And obviously, sin, death, pain, disease, none of those things were part of the plan. And so we still live in a world where that exists, even though we're kind of hoping for and looking forwards to a future that's free of those things. But it is a future hope rather than a here and now hope. And I think that's why sitting with people and being willing to listen and be present in their pain now, and not pretend or sweep it under the carpet or pretend it's not that big a deal. I think, John said, didn't he, that one of the things about suffering is that it can be for good. And I think that's true. That is true. But I think it's very easy for Christians just to kind of minimize people's pain and suffering because, oh, God will use that for something good in your life. Don't worry about it. And I think we can almost wrap that up too quickly in a pretty bow and forget that it's still really painful and difficult for that person going through it. I think we can be too quick to jump to that response without really being willing to sit and lament and grieve with people and sort of say, yes, this is awful and you're right to feel angry and upset and, disappointed and all of those things.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the biggest difficulties for me when you're talking with people who are going through suffering, or whether you're going through it yourself, my instant response is to try and fix the problem, which 99 times out of 100 you just can't, right? You just can't fix the problem all the time, and I've had to learn to be okay with that. Here's one of the things I find interesting when it comes to suffering, or when it comes to chronic pain or long-term pain, or the stuff that's been going on for a while. Do you find it easy as well to feel guilty that you're a bad person for doing that, or you've responded in a way that is maybe not right, or in your head you think it's ungodly? I should be more faith-filled. I should be more up for the fight. Do you know what I mean? That in my language, and acknowledging pain is not seen as a positive thing, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, and I think, the sort of Western evangelical church it has been very heavily influenced by prosperity gospel, and this idea that if you just believe something enough, if you just have enough faith, then everything will turn out well, and you'll be rich, you'll be prosperous, you'll be well, and when you look at people who still die of cancer or live, really godly people who live with long-term suffering or long-term illnesses and disease, it's, that's just not always the case. And so I think, although I understand it's well-meaning, I think sometimes we can go too far down that track of all things can be healed and redeemed and made better now. Although it's good to ask God for those things, that isn't always, not everyone gets their answers, do they, this side of heaven? And, I've got a friend who's a writer actually called KJ Ramsey. And anyone who's dealing with something like long-term illness, she has an autoimmune disease and has had it really for an entire adult life. And she writes about it really eloquently, about that experience of living with a long-term illness that's debilitating and will never get better. And she's like a really beautiful Christian and has a lot of great stuff to say about that, far better than I could explain it. But she's got a book called This Too Shall Last. And I really recommend anyone read it if they're interested in questions like that, like what about long-term suffering. But yeah, I think not
Sorry, Anna,
everything.
what was the name of that book again and the author?
So it's KJ Ramsey, and it's called This Too Shall Last instead of This Shall Pass.
John, if you're listening, maybe you can find the link and put that in
Yeah,
the comments for people.
It's really good. She's got a lot of good theological stuff to say on it, but she obviously talks about her own experience as well, and also some of the damage that can be done by people of faith who just assume that everything will be healed, and if you're not, it's a problem with you. Like, you've not got enough faith. You must have secret sin in your life if God's not healing you. That stuff's, I've had stuff like that landed at me before as well, and we don't believe that. But I don't believe that's true, and who knows why some people get healed and others don't, but not everyone does. So yeah.
No, I'm with you on it.
Incredible beauty can come out of someone's life who, like, she's written some incredible books, and she's a beautiful writer, through what she's been through. So yeah, I think God does bring some good stuff through our pain. But as John said, it's not a guarantee. I think sort of have to be open-hearted to God.
Yeah. I was really struck, actually, by one of the John, I see, has put the link in the comments.
Oh, yeah. Well done, John.
Thank you, John. One of the things that John struck me with the story from was the DRC. Do you know what I mean? And here you have a community that is suffering, mainly because of the Western world, right? And it's interesting. I'm going to tie this in with a question which came through to something that we posted on Instagram. So you believe that your God is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. So he designed and controlled and orchestrated everything. So therefore he created sin and evil and redemption. So everything happened just the way he wanted. So we are always always have been characters in his giant show. Is this not the exact phrase, but you kind of get the sort of the impression of what this guy's saying. So in other words, it's like, why would God create humans knowing that sin and suffering and all that sort of stuff was into it? And one of the things I find fascinating with this question, I think it's quite a deflective question, because if I think about what's going on in the DRC and all the suffering there, and we could go, well, look, there are people, child soldiers and all that sort of stuff. Why would God allow that? And you go, well, actually, no, that's happening because of the consumption habits of the West. That's happening because of you and me. That's not God. And so it's easy to offset the blame to God than it is to look at ourselves and go, well, hang on, no, somewhere down the line, I've got to take some responsibility for some of this stuff, right? Yeah. That is very, very, very difficult. And we responded to the Instagram comment saying, again, John touched on this, what he said would be true if you don't account for free will. For example, I have 3 kids. And we chose to have those 3 kids despite knowing that they would live in a broken world, that they themselves would experience pain and suffering and loss. Does that make me a bad parent? Does that make me a horrible person? And I choose to have kids knowing what's going on around me. But in that, the love in that, the walking through life with them in that, I'm hoping far outweighs the pain. Do you see what I mean? And there's you don't.
Yeah, it's an interesting point.
It is, isn't it? Because you don't think to yourself, well, I know the world's broken, therefore I'm not going to have kids. You have kids despite knowing it's broken, because somehow in it there's a magic. And I think, is God any different? Obviously he's different. Do you know what I mean? But there's a logic here that I think we can use.
But we are created in God's image, aren't we, as human beings?
Yeah.
So the Bible says, and God is a relational being, and we're relational beings. So it kind of figures that we want to live in family and in community and in connected to other people and kind of to leave our imprint on the world. And,
Yeah.
so yeah, I would say God probably is like that and is motivated in a similar way to us, because, we're made like him. So, yeah, yeah, it is an interesting point.
So some of the other questions that have come that we've got in the comments: why does God allow the innocent to suffer? Does God cause suffering? That's a really big, deep theological question. Is God the author of suffering? And what about lifelong suffering? I mean, you've mentioned KJ Ramsey. Why does God allow illness such as cancer, a major cause of suffering? And there are all these kind of questions, aren't there, which sort of all follow a very similar theme. And that, I think, from my part here, is to say there is suffering. And can God remove it? One would argue yes, and one would argue actually heaven is a place where there is no more tears, where there is no more pain, but there is no more sin and there is no more broken world. And so I feel like God has sort of, he's figured it out, but we want it here and now, and it's in the future. And so in the meantime, we have a God who got involved in our suffering, who suffered himself on our behalf. And like you said, Anna, is his presence. That's what we want. We want presence in the pain, and he's with us. And I'd much rather have God with me in the suffering than not. Do you know what I mean? Rather than get angry at God and go, God, why are you making this happen?
Yeah.
Be challenged. I'm super challenged and inspired by the DRC guys, which go, God, this is going on. We invite your presence into the midst of it. And I just think it's incredible, really.
Yeah. I mean, that's it, isn't it? It's like we live in a broken world now, whether we invite God to be part of that or not. People have said to me, how can you still believe in God after, all the hard things you've been through? And I just think, but it wouldn't be easier not believing in God, would it? Then it's just all meaningless and there's no hope at all. Like, I'd rather have a hope for the future that all things are going to be made right than just go through life going, well, it's all meaningless and hopeless. I don't know which of the two would I rather cling to. And I think, it's the valid questions, aren't they? Like, when, why does God allow it? But I think John explained that quite well in terms of that free will thing. And, does God cause it? I don't think so. I think, as you said, humankind caused it. And, the kind of original fall of sin. So I'm not saying every time someone's suffering, it's direct consequence of something they've done wrong. But I think we've, as humankind, have set the ball rolling for a broken world. And, look at things like climate change and, all the global disasters that are happening with floods and famines and earthquakes and all kinds happening all over our world. And you think, how much of that is the way that we're abusing and using the world's resources poorly? And I don't know. It's hard. There's not an exact cause and effect, is there? But it's hard to measure. But I suspect, that's more us as human beings than God as well.
Yeah, it is. And I totally agree. We have to, in some respects, we have to take some responsibility for the world suffering. But that doesn't change the suffering that we go through. And it may be that we're going through suffering because of decisions that we've made that we have to be, take responsibility for. I think there are consequences sometimes that we can't outrun. But that said, I don't think there's any consequence that is beyond God's grace. And I don't think there is anything that he will not be with us in. And I think that is, well, that's actually the astounding thing about the Christian faith, isn't it? And it's there's no easy answers. There's no silver bullet. There's not always a shortcut. And it's interesting, that scripture that John referred to, that suffering results in perseverance, character, and character, hope. And actually the Bible places strong emphasis on things like perseverance and character. And you only really get those when you've gone through a few things. Is a truth, right? Is a reality.
Yeah.
And you look at the story of the early church. Jesus goes to heaven. We're going to get into this in the new sort of John's Gospel and Acts series coming up starting in September. But Jesus kind of clears off to heaven and the church starts, and it's all very contained. And then all of a sudden, persecution arises. The church gets scattered, but it properly explodes, right? I mean, properly explodes. And so if there hadn't been that persecution and suffering at the start, what would have happened to the church? I don't know. And it's a really interesting one, isn't it? That in that suffering, that in that pain, God can still work and he can still be glorified. And for him, it's not the end. And that's a beautiful thing, as painful as it sounds.
Yeah. And I think we're so in our world today, we're so, particularly in the West, we're so kind of averse to pain, aren't we? We do almost anything we can to avoid it, and to kind of numb ourselves. We as soon as life gets hard, we just tune out and watch Netflix. You know, there's nothing wrong with Netflix, but yeah, we have that kind of, you know, we just want to avoid anything that's difficult as much as possible, make our lives as easy and as comfortable as possible. And you know, our relative prosperity allows us to do that a lot of the times. But as you say, there's some things that no one can outrun. Like in the end, you know, someone's asked about cancer here, which, you know, is something I feel deeply about. You know, I've had 2 family members who've had cancer in the last couple of years. And I've got other friends who are my age who are dealing with like potentially life-threatening cancers now, you know, with young families. And yeah, I think death does come to us all because, again, it's a consequence of sin and a broken, fallen world. Like we all, you know, whether it's cancer or something else, we're all gonna die of something, aren't we? It's the only thing that's sure, except that,
Well, that and taxes, apparently.
Really.
Yeah, death and taxes, the only 2 things that we can be sure about.
You know, and so for me, again, it's a less compelling question to ask why cancer, and more compelling to say, well, what now? How do you handle it when it affects you or someone you love, and what are you going to do about it? It's a much more compelling question to say, well, what can I do to ease someone else's pain, or to make things a bit better here on earth, to bring a bit of heaven down to earth here and now? Yeah. And for me, that's a much more compelling question, because you can't change its existence, or not at the moment. Maybe some clever professionals will, medical people one day. But for me, that's a much more interesting question, because I don't know, we can't explain away the why, and we can't fix it all, but we can, like Jesus did, get involved and get our hands dirty and help someone who's suffering.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point, because one of the things that comes across in the Gospels, which is abundantly obvious, there was a reason why Jesus suffered, was for everybody else, was for you and for me. And I think in the place of suffering, one of the things that you can do is to reach out to other people, and not just focusing on you or try and numb yourself. I thought that was a very poignant point there. And a poignant point, the numbing yourself, you know, whatever it is, Netflix or whatever. We do try and numb ourselves as a culture, and I think it's not really in the Bible. But that, I think, is probably where we need to end it, given the time. So, yes, thank you, Anna, for the conversation. The conversation street, for me, flies by at 1,000,000 miles an hour. You always run out of time.
And it's such a big subject, isn't it? It's like you could talk about it for hours and not resolve it all. So half an hour is short.
Yeah, you could. You totally could. Now, if you want to know more, check out Anna's friend's book. What was it? Sorry, KJ Ramsey. Or indeed, check out Anna's blog, because you have talked a lot about your own journey through the suffering of miscarriage on your blog, and your response to that. You can check that out as well just give it a quick plug.
It's at annakettle.com, so nice and easy to remember.
Nice and easy. So check out Anna's website as well. You can check out all her writings on there, or stuff on Instagram. It is a tough topic. So if you would like to get in touch with us, if you are going through something, if you just want some whatever, some prayer, some support, you just want to tell someone what's going on, you can reach out to us here at crowd.church, www.crowd.church. You can also reach out to us on social media, either on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube at Crowd Church. It will be great to hear from you. John Harding is actually in the comments. He said, Anna, Edmo, really, really great conversation streak. Thank you. Well, thank you for doing the talk, John.
Yeah.
Mutual love, support and respect. So thank you for being with us this week. What is coming up next week, Anna? Can you remember?
Yes, I can. So next week we've got Pete Barrington is going to be speaking, and he's going to be doing a talk next week on what does the Bible say about Jesus. And I believe that the host next week is yourself and the lovely Dan Orange.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we'll see who turns up. Absolutely. So what does the Bible say about Jesus? Last week we did what does the Bible say about God? Dan Rogers did that talk. I hosted that with John Harding. That was a great week. So next week we're going to kind of carry that on with what does the Bible say about Jesus, because, well, this is the question of all questions to get into, isn't it, really? Who is Jesus? What does the Bible say about him? More importantly, what do you say about Jesus? And if this is your first time at church, if this is your first time getting involved in Christian things, stay plugged in. Do like and subscribe with what's going on. I would encourage you to explore more about the Christian faith, to explore more about Jesus. And you can do that by connecting with us here at Crowd Church. We would love to hear from you, and do stick with us and enjoy the journey, because it is an extraordinary journey to be on. Anna, thank you so much for being with us. Oh, all the comments are coming in now. Chris Kent, suffering changes our perspective. When our first son died, it really made us look at the hope of heaven and eternity, in which Jesus wipes away all of our tears. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. That's not an easy thing to share. But again, the hope of heaven. I totally agree that actually, when you sweep it all away, there is this mindset which says, in heaven, there is no more tears, there is no more pain. And I'm going to get to slide down those streets in my socks. That's my big plan for heaven. So, come and join us there. It'll be great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us. Anna, anything else from you?
So I didn't even hear that just broke up. What did you just say? The wonders of technology, that was so slick, wasn't it?
Oh, brilliant. I love it when it works. Any closing remarks from your good self, dear?
No, just thanks for having me. It's been a really good conversation. And do keep posting through the week. Get in touch with us if you want to talk about these issues more. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. We are going to close with one more worship song, The King of My Heart. And this is a great declaration for all of us in life, wherever we're at, whatever we're going through. This is just a beautiful song to sort of declare your hope in Christ. And then once the song is finished, the live stream will automatically end, but you are more than welcome to stay around during the song. Write your questions, thoughts in the comments, carry on the conversation. But from myself and from Anna, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a fantastic week. Stay blessed, everyone, and we'll be back next Sunday. Bye for now.
Take care, everyone.
Oh, that was slick.
We're having a day of it today, aren't we?
We'll try that again. The buttons aren't working. Oh no, the worship is not wanting to play. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to finish the live stream. Or we could just rattle on for another 5 minutes. No, I won't do that to her.
Let the king of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the king of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom of my life. Oh, he is my song. You are good. You're good, oh, you are good, you're good. Let the king of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the king of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song.
Let the king